All right. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. We have a lot of folks here with us this evening. We're at close to 100 people. We have 97. So, wow, that's great. Um, so I wanted to just quickly get things started. So thank you all for joining us this evening for a virtual learning opportunity on this timely and important topic of property assessments. This is specifically designed for City of Milwaukee homeowners who live in their home, who would like to learn a bit more about the assessment process, how they're calculated, how it's tied to property taxes, the appeal process, and other relevant considerations. Before we get started, I'd like to go through some housekeeping rules for this evening. Please keep yourself muted at all times. With this many attendees, any additional noise will become distracting. If you have a question for one of the presenters, please put it in the chat. That way we can try to cover as many of those questions as we possibly can in our limited time together this evening. My colleague Beth from Milwaukee Habitat for Humanity will be monitoring the chat and will field those questions after each presentation. So you may find it most helpful to use speaker view, which you can find by using the view button at the top right corner. We are also recording this evening's meeting and will make it available to view later this week on takerootmilwaukee.com. That's Take Root Milwaukee's website. This evening is brought to you by Take Root Milwaukee, which is a consortium that collectively works to promote sustainable homeownership in Milwaukee. And I'm Heather Doomer Combs. I'm the program director of Take Root Milwaukee. We also have member partner Milwaukee Habitat for Humanity, who is also co-hosting this evening. And Beth Van Gorp is from Milwaukee Habitat for Humanity, and she's co-facilitating with me. We're pleased to have the City of Milwaukee Deputy Commissioner of Assessments, Ryan Ranker, with us. He will present on what is and isn't a property assessment, how it's calculated, and some other very important and timely details. We also have Emmett Gross. He's from the Home Retention Manager with Housing Resources Incorporated. Housing Resources is also a valuable member partner of Take Root. Emmett will be providing some tips on when to consider an appeal, alternatives to appealing, and tax payment planning. And lastly, Karen Taylor is a realtor with Homestead Realty and has been a longtime member and partner of Take Root. She, along with other realtors, have agreed to assist residents with real estate market comparables. So Karen is going to walk us through briefly about what comps are and when they may be helpful to you. Let's get started with hearing from Ryan from the assessor's office. You're on mute.
Yeah, it was telling me the host had to unmute me.
My apologies. It
Oh, no
was
worries, no worries. Well, good evening, everybody. I'll kind of introduce myself, tell you a little bit about me, and then I'll pull up my presentation and we can kind of walk through, assessments and the appeal process. So yeah, again, I'm the deputy commissioner at the assessor's office. I've been with the assessor's office. This is my 22nd year in the office. I started off there back in 2000 and the end of 2004, early 2005. And I was, when we start in the assessor's office, you start basically assessing residential properties. Once you can kind of get a grasp on residential, you start looking at more local commercial, kind of mom and pop shops. And you kind of work your up the ladder in complexity as far as what you're valuing. So I moved on from there and I started doing gas station, downtown office buildings, oil terminals, lots of crazier properties as I've been there kind of forever now. But I'm born and bred in Wisconsin. I grew up in a small town about an hour south here called Twin Lakes. I got my undergrad at Parkside in Kenosha. I moved up to Milwaukee to get my graduate degree, and I liked it so much that I stayed here. So now I've been here in Milwaukee about 22 years too. So it's kind of coincided with coming up to school. I've stayed here and been working here ever since. Um, Let me pull up my presentation here for you. I'll get that going. Can everybody see that okay? Yes? Okay, awesome. Okay, so City of Milwaukee, we reassess properties every year. Um, Statutorily, municipalities are allowed to, they must do a reassessment to keep properties within plus or minus 10% of market value every 5 years. But markets can change quickly and, hence you'll see the municipalities that wait 5 years, often homeowners see 100% increases then when they do it. And people's, their minds really explode with that. So we try, and although the last few years we've been seeing 10% increases, I would say on average for the last 5 or 6 years. But in Milwaukee, if we would have waited 5 years over the last 5 years, people would have seen 70, 80, 150% increases. So we think it's best to stay on top of the market. And every year, as of January 1st, we release our assessed values. Well, we release them I should say, at the end of April is when the notices go out, but they're as of January 1st every year. Um, and so if you can see the my screen here, it's Wisconsin State Statute 7032 sub 1, um, where it says real property must be specified in the manner described in the Wisconsin Property Assessment Manual from actual view or best information available, which is because we have 21 appraisers in our office right now, and the city of Milwaukee has about 155,000 properties. And that's not including exempt properties, churches, schools, things like that. So if you include all of those properties, it's over 160,000. So with 21 appraisers, we can't go out and even do an exterior view of every property in the city every year. So it's things like permits that apply to a property. It's a homeowner giving us a call and saying, "Hey, come on out. I think something's wrong with my property listing." When a property sells, which really gets at how the assessments are calculated, but and or then when somebody appeals. So those are the reasons we typically go out specifically for a particular property or parcel is because one of those matters. Because again, with 21 appraisers, we just don't have the time to go look at every property. So we trust the record that we have from um, you know original building plans, from previous inspections, from information we find in real estate listings. And or if an appraiser is out, let's say, and they've got a couple appointments on one block, they might notice something going on at another property on the block. So they might take a look when they're out there. Um, but and I'll get into this in a later slide. This is kind of why we do a thing what's called mass appraisal. But so we try to make our listings, our property record and our listings based on the best information available and or the best information that we can obtain as of our valuation date. And some of the best information, obviously, as far as value for a specific property, once you once you once we believe we know the property, it's so many square feet, it's at such and such an address, it's in this condition, it has had updates, it hasn't had updates, it's got two bathrooms, whatever those factors might be. Those are the things that we look at to say, okay, these are now reasonably comparable properties that we have found in the marketplace, recently sold sales. As that statute kind of gets into there, um, according to professional appraisal practices, recent arm's length sales are the best indication of value for that, not only the property that's sold, but other properties similar to that property. So that's why every year, um, that is probably like half of our time. Half of our time is dealing with appeals and people objecting to their value. But a lot of the other time then is reviewing these sales and talking to buyers and sellers in the market, making sure we understand the sale, what went on behind the sale, who was selling to who, and those types of factors as we look at the different types of properties within a neighborhood, the prices that they're selling for, and how then that compares to our assessment. So the next statute I have listed here is 70.03, which is just really the definition of what real property is, which is what we're valuing. So it includes not only the land and the buildings, but all improvements thereon, all fixtures and rights appertaining to. Um, and then I just have another quote at the bottom there, which says, basically that the assessor must look at sales. And I'll get into that. I believe that's my next slide. No, it's, I'll talk about that. Markarian hierarchy. This is basically a court case law from 1970, which basically tells us that to come up with a value for assessments, assessors need to look at comparable sales. Comparable sales are what are considered, they're considered tier two. A sale of the subject is tier one. And this was all established in this court case. So if you have a property and you can show that it was an arm's length sale, meaning willing buyer, willing seller, nobody under duress, the parties aren't related, nobody's getting a deal or anything like that. It's a what we, in quotes, market transaction. That's the best evidence of value for that property. But then we look at other properties like those sales and say, okay, well, we've got these 10 ranches that have sold in a neighborhood. And, this is just to make the example simple. They're all 1,000 square feet. And let's say all the ranches in the neighborhood are 1,000 square feet. They're all the same. And we've got 10 of them that just sold and they all sold for $100,000. Well, looking at the comparable sales, we would say, since they're all the same, that's the value that we're going to place on those properties for an assessment. And that's a very simple and crude example, but I think it gets across, hopefully, kind of what we're looking at when we're trying to establish values in a neighborhood. We don't use south side properties to value north side properties. We don't look at a mansion to value a ranch. We're generally within a neighborhood looking at single family homes to value other single family homes. Duplexes and triplexes would be used to value other duplexes and triplexes. So each class and use has its own set of comparable sales that we use to determine a value. Um, and especially for residential, we're usually looking at in this Markarian hierarchy, tier one or tier two. It's only when we start getting into more income producing properties, rental properties, that we might go to a tier three. The cost approach can be used, which is basically how much did you pay for the property plus the value of the land. But that can be used if it's a brand new property. And we've had this in a few residential neighborhoods where they were predominantly older properties, but then we've started to see some new properties being built there. And so generally they were at a higher value than many of the older sales of the older properties. So the cost approach was a little more appropriate for their value. And how we the system we use to determine these values, it's called mass appraisal because it's basically looking at these sales. Well, let me back up a little bit. We have the city broken into geez, I don't even know the exact number of neighborhoods that we have, but the neighborhoods are based on sales and they're historic sales that go back at least like 50 or 60 years. Um, so we demarcate, and sometimes it's a river that kind of separates a residential neighborhood. It could be a commercial strip that kind of separates. But historically, we see a difference in values, and that's kind of where we know, okay, this belongs in this neighborhood, this belongs in a different neighborhood, because we're seeing and it's usually a starkly different sales price. And so if a property is selling for, $200 on one side of the river, $200 a square foot versus $100 a square foot on the other side of the river, we don't kind of want to mass appraise those as the same neighborhood because we could you know, undervalue one side and overvalue the other. So it's much better to kind of make those two separate neighborhoods and look at the sales within that parameter to come up with what the mass appraised assessment would be. And mass appraisal, again, it kind of gets back to the fact that we have 150,000 parcels. We've got 21 appraisers. It's the only really logical way to keep property values at their market level year after year. It's also, again, it's statutorily required of the assessors. It's in our, what is the Wisconsin, it's kind of the Bible for assessment in Wisconsin. It's called the Wisconsin Property Assessment Manual. It's put out by the Wisconsin Department of Revenue. And so that is what instructs us to use mass appraisal. It's the only way really to, again, keep property values also uniform. Because if we were doing individual appraisals on every property, you would probably have, again, if we get back to that example of ranches, instead of having them all at the sale prices, which would make them uniform, if everybody was going out and valuing each one differently, that wouldn't be uniform and it wouldn't be fair. So that a mass appraisal system is a system that helps to keep values in line not only with the sales, but with similar properties. So all ranches will be valued similarly as other ranches. All single family will be valued similarly. It takes out a lot of the kind of individual error that could occur if we were trying to go in and individually assess every property in a neighborhood. Um, so a big part of this is then sale review, which is it's pretty much just as it sounds. It's our appraisers. We are notified, a title company notifies us whenever a property is sold. We also have subscriptions to multiple listing service and CoStar and some other real estate brokerages in the area that list properties that are for sale, that have sold. Um, so as we can see them come through our system and or we notice them as we're doing our research, we start reviewing not only the listings versus what we have the property record listed as, but we also then try to talk to some of these owners to find out if it's a valid sale, if they bought it from their uncle, if, it was just marketed, and every sale doesn't have a listing. So sometimes it's for sale by owner, which can also be a valid market transaction. But so we're trying to kind of vet and look through all these sales so that we can actually make them somewhat useful to us because all sales are not the same because all properties are not the same, right? Like some property has been heavily remodeled. So I don't want to use a, very good to excellent condition property to value a property that has a lot of deferred maintenance and is, what might be termed a fixer-upper. So we want to know kind of the factors, not only the buyer and seller in the sale, but to make sure we know the listing and the property record that sale has, so then we can apply it to similar properties nearby that sale or within that neighborhood. Um, and again, this is kind of all us following the statutes, following the Department of Revenue's directives as to how assessments are to be done in the state of Wisconsin. Um, and I mean, most people, if you're looking, if the people who bought a house, this is kind of typical of what buyers do too, right? When you're looking for a home, you have an idea of what you want and where you want to go, and you start looking like, okay, well, they want X for this house. That seems like a lot. Let me go check on this one. Oh boy, they want even more for this one. Like you can start getting a quick feel just looking at listings in a neighborhood, which is something I would recommend for people like, you might get an assessment, you might, be like, whoa, what's going on here? I would say we have a listing on the City of Milwaukee Assessor's website of all the sales that have occurred. But you can use Trulia, Redfin, Zillow. You can go out there and look at, sold and for sale properties to get a good idea of what things are going for in the market. Um, which, I would recommend that as a first step. If, you've looked at your assessment notice and you think we're crazy, maybe just take a quick, Google your neighborhood, take a look at that. But then I would say, come talk to us, give us a call, which I hope most of you who've gotten your notices that, you can see those instructions on the notice to, call the assessor, talk to your neighborhood assessor. But there's a lot of tools out there for people, aside from please speak to us. We want to inform you about the assessment process and how we came up with your value. But if you're just kind of, during the year wondering what's going on in the market, those are good tools. There's a lot of websites and real estate brokerages that are out there that will show you what things are selling for and what they're asking for different properties out there. Um, so as many of you have probably seen or received, we've sent out notices last Friday. And we're in right now what is called our open book period, um, which is it goes way back in property assessment lore to when you would actually have to go down to the, assessment at the city hall, and they would actually open the assessment roll, the book, and talk to you if you wanted to appeal or wanted to talk about your assessed value. Um, and this extends until the third Monday in May. Um, And this is the time to, ask questions, talk to your neighborhood assessor, um, you know, and we have people, the whole gamut of questions, we're here to answer them. We've had people just call and say, "What is this notice I got in the mail?" And we can explain that. But other ones want to think more, "Hey, I see this value. Tell me how you got it." Not everybody is, mad at us. A lot of people are, but not everybody is. Some of them are just kind of like, please explain this to me. Tell me how this works. Tell me what's going on. And we're happy to do that. And hopefully what I'm telling you today will clear up some of this. But if not, again, we're here. We're there Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4:45 every day of the week, all year long. And we're happy to answer questions. And I would also encourage a lot of people to go to our website. We've got a ton of information on the website regarding, what assessments are, how they're done, uh, and even appealing assessments now. We have an online appeal. So you can go online and do everything right online. You don't even have to, leave your house, step foot into the office. You don't have to deal with the mail or anything. You can do it all online. But this is kind of the month. Once the notices come out, the end of April through that third Monday in May, if you think something is up with the appeal, that is the time to talk to the assessor's office to file an appeal. Um, some people will see that notice, they'll put it aside. Then they get the tax bill at the end of the year. Now they've got more questions. Now they want to appeal. Well, now it's too late. Now you're going to have to wait again until April and try again next year if you still want to appeal. So I would say though, for those of you who, have questions, this is the time to give our office a call, talk to your neighborhood assessor. And that I would say is should be your first step, um, because we could have information wrong, and it could just be a simple thing of coming out looking at the property, square footage is wrong. We've got a bathroom listed that's not there. And some of it's not going to be a huge difference, but some of it could be. And at the end of the day, we just want the properties listed correctly and valued correctly. I don't care if your assessment goes down by, 100,000. I don't care, I have, we don't work on a commission. We don't get any extra pay for this. So whether assessments were to go up 100% or down 100%, none of that really changes anything for us. We just want to get the values right and have your properties listed correctly. Um, so people calling up and talking to us too, it also helps them kind of get the word out, explain it to your neighbors. But it also, I'm hope that, things like attending these meetings lets people know that, we want the process to be fair. We want to help. Um, and we want people to, kind of have faith in what we're doing that, yeah, I spoke with them. What they said made sense. I think they're at least being fair, whether or not you agree with the system and all that stuff, which, there's stuff that I might not agree with in the system, but I can't change it. I have to follow what the Department of Revenue tells me, what the state statutes tell me. So, the appraisal practices are kind of baked in, and until the legislature or somebody changes them, we have to follow, sale, comparable sales are what we're going to look at to value most properties. Um, but so let's say you've talked with an appraiser, um, and it's still something you don't think it's right. They didn't, address your issues. You still think something's up with the value. That's when you're going to want to do the formal appeal, um, in which you can either request it and it can be mailed to you. You can come right down to the office and fill one out, or you can go online and do it. Which, for anybody who has a computer, the online one it's really an easy one. We've worked with our technology department at the city to kind of, you know, strengthen this up over the last few years. And so this is one, I think it was almost a third of our appeals, I think, in the last year. And so we're hoping this year it's probably going to be about two-thirds are going to go use the online appeal. But that would be your step then. Follow the instructions on the your assessment notices and the handouts that were in that, to call down to our office if you want to appeal. What they will do is they will put you in contact with your neighborhood appraiser, or if, to residential property, they will let you talk to a residential appraiser who can tell you about the process, tell you about comparable sales, pull up some of the comparable sales in your neighborhood. They can discuss those things with you and kind of let you know what they're seeing. And you can talk about your property with them. Say, well, my property is 1,200 square feet. It's got three bedrooms, one bath. And we can check that to make sure our listing matches what you're telling us. Um, so I always think it's a good thing, that we talk to each other, and that's a good starting point to figure out, whether the assessment is reasonable or whether or not maybe we should move forward and just process the appeal. So then an appraiser can kind of look into some more sales, maybe come out and inspect the property, and clean some things up. But yeah, there's all kinds of evidence. Again, sales are going to be your best evidence. So if you know of comparable sales of properties like yours, bring those to the assessor's attention. If you have an appraisal that was just done, you've recently bought the property in the last year or two, or you've just refinanced and you've got an appraisal done, that's great evidence. Other things that you might want to make the assessor aware of, if you've had any quotes for repairs, you've got some deferred maintenance, you've got some garage issues or roof issues or stuff like that, and you've got quotes that you can actually say, yeah, hey, come on out. You can see this leak, and here's what it's going to cost me to fix this roof. That's all good information because that gets at, the condition of the property then, which, guides us towards which comparables we want to look at to say, okay, well, here's what some properties with some deferred maintenance in the market are selling for versus here's completely remodeled properties in the market and here's what they're selling for. Um, so you've gone online and or you've filled out the form and got it back to us, get it back to our office, and the appeal's been submitted. So what's going to happen after that is an appraiser is going to talk to you and they're going to follow up, get any information from you. They're going to, talk with you, possibly inspect your property, make sure we have it listed correctly, look over the comparable sales. Um, so that's the process that they are going to make sure they know your property and they know the listing. Because again, that guides what properties they're going to look at as far as comparable sales that they want to use to determine a fair value or a fair range of value for your property. Uh, and they make that determination and they give that to what is called the Board of Assessors. And the Board of Assessors is just the managers at the assessor's office. We review all the appraisers' work as they review these appeals. So after they get done with their work, they make recommendations. I've went out, I've looked at sales. I think this property is 10% overvalued. Here's my new recommended value for it. We then look at, okay, well, what sales did they look at? Does that seem reasonable? Okay, we're good with that. Some might look at sales and say, this assessment's good. The sales support the assessment. It should be sustained. And so we go through and we review all the notes that the appraisers give us on all the objections that they're processing. And then just as, and then that's when you'll get the determination. Okay, we've initially reviewed the appeal. Here's, here's what it's changed, it's gone up, it's gone down, it's stayed the same. Um, and that's one thing too, I guess I should mention too, that the options are not just staying the same and just going down. Assessment, if we come out and the kitchen's remodeled, we find a rec room in the basement, there's another bathroom in the basement, we have to add that to the listing. Now we're looking at new comparables and we're putting a different value on there for that, as of January 1st. So, you know, three things can happen. Stay the same, go up, go down. Um, but if you don't like that kind of initial round talking to your appraiser, they do the work, they give a recommendation to the Board of Assessors, you don't like that determination. The next step is then going to what is known as our Board of Review, and they're kind of a quasi judicial body. The mayor appoints, and these are usually attorneys, real estate brokers, people who have some familiarity with real estate markets. But again, they have to follow case law, state statute, uh, Department of Revenue rules. There's stuff that they're looking at when now you and the appraiser will have to go to this hearing and you have to present evidence as to why the assessment is wrong. Um, so the burden is on the owner to show that the assessment is wrong, which is why, again, you want to have an appraisal or comparable sales. Um, Reasons like, it went up a lot. That's 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 not a valuation. It has to be something you have to have some evidence to back up your opinion of value as to the market value of your property. Um, but so at a board of review, then you'll present your evidence, or you'll have an appraiser there with you to present your evidence. And then the assessor will present their evidence. The board of review will make a decision. And, uh, you know, I will say most of the time the board of review does side with the assessor's office. And this is only because, we only go down to the board of review for a few hundred properties. So it's literally, less than a half a percent of properties that appeal and feel we are so wrong that they want to go to a board of review. And generally, too, we're not that stubborn. We understand there's a range. And if we think, we're a little aggressive, we're going to, bring the property within a more reasonable range based on comparable sales. So we're not going down to the board of review just on each and every property with the idea that we can call the market to the penny, which kind of gets back at the DOR's, market value is a range, and hence municipalities have to be within 10% of market value every 5 years. So and I think that's a reasonable range for an opinion of value. I think reasonable minds can differ 10% on value. Uh, and so if we're reasonably within the market, we're going to go to the board of the review on those. But anything that where we think the sales show we've been aggressive, we have no problem changing those. If, especially if there's something wrong with the listing, we're going to change that. Again, with 21 appraisers, we don't have the time to just fight each and every homeowner for every penny. We're not doing that. This is when we have a clear indication of the value. That's when we'll schedule for the board of review. But again, the burden then is going to be on the owner to show why the assessor is wrong, and they're going to have to provide their own evidence that supports their opinion of value. And I think that was kind of my beginning to end there. I can kick it back to Heather or Beth.
Great. I will start off with the questions. Some general ones first, and I saw someone said, uh, this is discouraging, but take root, and Milwaukee Habitat is here to help, make sure that we have good education about this and hopefully support people if they want to appeal. So we're in it together for sure. Um, there's assessments have gone up so much in the last couple of years. Like someone mentioned that they bought the home for $236,000 just 2 years ago, and now it's $267,000. Why in general have the assessments gone up so much over the last few years?
Sales.
Hmm.
That's the clearest indicator is what people are willing to pay for properties. Again, that's all we're looking at in a neighborhood. Um, we're not targeting anything. We're just our job is to reflect sales in the neighborhood. And I think one of the things too is when people look at like percentages too, I always like to say, well, you know, if I have a $200,000 home and it increases $20,000, that's a 10% increase. But if I have a $60,000 home and it increases $20,000, that's a 33% increase. So, some of it just has to do with the starting point that you're at. And Milwaukee, I mean, Milwaukee, and I think this was in the New York Times. This was probably back like 8 years ago that they were talking about Milwaukee being in a renaissance, and that the development dollars that people are spending, not only the prices people are buying for homes, remodeling, permits, new construction, commercial, residential. We haven't seen this amount of development since World War II. So Milwaukee is really, again, we're in a renaissance here right now. And, it's good for equity, but yes, I get people seeing sticker shock as like my property went up 10% again this year, went up 15%. Like, uh, you know, I get that. I live in the city too. So I'm always kind of looking, oh, what did the assessor raise my assessment this year? Because I don't do neighborhood assessments. I just monitor all the assessors now. So I'm not out in the field as much anymore. So I'm still somewhat sticker shock looking like, I just, there's a house around the corner from me that I don't know, you know, it's not the most beautiful home. Somebody paid, $500,000 for it, like, 14 months ago. And I'm like, what is going on? So I get this, I have the sticker shock too on some of this, but when you start going from house to house and everybody's paying, 250 bucks a square foot, that's what's happening in the neighborhood is that's what people are willing to pay is that's going to be the assessment. So, I sorry to say there's not a lot we can do with that.
And is there a, I looked at the list of different aldermanic districts where we saw some big, increases and smaller increases. Is there a particular, are we seeing certain neighborhoods or certain aldermanic districts are seeing a bigger increase in assessments? And do you have any insight into?
It's really a hodgepodge all across the city. I think it's generally we saw a range, anywhere from, maybe 3 or 4% up to some were still increasing 20 or more percent. Um, but again, some of that has to do with your starting point. If you're $100,000 house and you're going to 150, the percentage is much bigger than if you're, 250 going to 275 or something. So um, that's and that's not to say that those property taxes won't increase, but that's kind of like, whoa, that's part of where the percentage is, and that's kind of like how markets work, right? Too, when certain districts become kind of the high rent districts, people then start moving, a couple blocks over and they start buying up those, oh, well, I want to be kind of close, so this neighborhood's close. They start moving into that neighborhood and stuff. So, I mean, and that's what's steadily been happening in Milwaukee, like the last 10 years is slowly things have been branching out to different neighborhoods and, that rising tide has been lifting all boats.
So I have a few questions and I'm going to try to bundle them here,
Sure,
Ryan.
sure.
So it is a lot of them have to do with the appeals process. So there were some questions about is there a cost to the appeal?
No.
And then roughly how long does the appeal process take? And what is generally the success rate for that?
Um, the rate will depend on how many appeals we get that year. Um, so I mean, geez, I want to think back and I mean, typically it's about 1.5% of properties appeal. So 2,000, 2,500 maybe. Think last year we had about 3,000. In 2020, we had I think over 7,000. That was a real banner year.
Yeah. So of those that appeal, what's the success rate?
Um, it's not like half or anything like that. It's a small percent that have success, but I would say there's a number that it's property records are corrected. We have an extra bath listed. We have the attic listed as finished, and it's not. So there still can, there's plenty of wiggle room. I would say maybe 15% probably sees some type of change, depending on the year, maybe a little more. Um, but yeah, there's always those special circumstances where, we have information wrong about a property or we think it's in a better condition than it is, or they bring some good sales to our attention that we consider and say, yeah, if we factor that in, that is going to knock you down another 10% or whatever it might be. So
So if you appeal, it could allow your assessment to be updated, right? Either up or down. And so I did have a couple of questions around taxes because we know property assessments affect property taxes, which in 6 months from now we'll get or a little more. Are there other things beyond property assessment that affects property taxes? Like, is there anything else that is included in determining property taxes? And then another question around property taxes was if my assessment increases, will my taxes increase?
So on your property tax bill, you're going to see the assessed value, but there can be a lot of other items on there. I mean, it could be unpaid water bills, there's a lot of stuff that is not the assessor adding stuff on. You know, there's basically five taxing entities: the city, the county, the sewage district, and MPS and MATC. And so they all have budgets. And that's what's going to determine the levy every year. And the levy can only increase based on the percentage of new construction, within the municipality. So there, everybody can't just say, "Hey, we all need another, 20 billion," and the levy explodes or anything like this. So there is some constraint to that. But whether or not your specific tax bill will increase, it's usually determined if let's say, this year, I think the city increase was 7% on average, maybe six, somewhere in that range. Sorry if I'm off a little.
Around six something, yeah.
So if you saw an increase well above 7%, your tax bill probably will be higher. And if you're at 6 or 7 or below that, your tax bill should stay the same. You could even see it go down a little bit. And that again that's all based on that the budgets aren't exploding or changing. And the city has done a good job keeping stuff right around 2% for the last 6, 7, 8 years or so. We've been like, 2.1, 2.05, 2.6, things like that. That's generally been kind of the percent. If you look at your value and multiply it by 2%, that's generally going to be what your taxes are in the city. So as long as that doesn't increase too much, that general rule will hold that if you're well above the city average, you'll probably see a tax increase. If you're at it or below it, you'll probably stay the same or you might go down a little.
I have a lot of questions, and we're probably not going to have a chance to get to all of them. One quick one was, how do I find who my neighborhood assessor is?
Call our office. There's a number on the assessment notice. Um, I can probably pull it. I'll look for it and I'll give that out. But if you can't find it on your notice, but just call and say, I'm Ryan Ranker. I live at this address. I've just got some questions about, my assessment. I'd like to talk to my neighborhood assessor.
Okay, great.
I what kind of separates out people who are successful in the appeals? Like what makes for the most likelihood of successfully appealing?
Well, I would say having a case. And I don't want to be flippant about it, but like there's, we've either made a mistake as far as the property listing. Generally, again, we've got square footage, we've got something off that's wrong about it. Um, or somebody is bringing some sales to us that we weren't considering. That's why I say it doesn't happen a lot because every sale that occurs in the city ends up in our system and we review it and we look at them and we're looking at all these in all neighborhoods. So sometimes it can be a combination of the two, though. We have a bathroom that wasn't there, and there were a couple sales that we might want to consider. And so, rather than being, maybe in the middle of the range, they should be at the bottom of the range of the values we're looking at. And so we'll make those adjustments.
There are a number of questions about neighborhoods that have a mix of newly built homes and old homes, like 100-plus-year-old homes. And so how do you assess those kind of neighborhoods?
Again, we look at sales, and some of those we don't have sales on the newer properties. Thus, we kind of lean towards the cost to build. Um, because that, again, there's three methods of valuation in the assessment world, which are basically looking at sales or comparable sales. You look at the income that a property can generate, which you will then capitalize to discover a value, or you look at what somebody is willing to pay to buy land and build something. Um, because generally, s- something is not getting built. A lender is not lending if they don't see that there's a market and it's worth that much in the market. So, although sales kind of rule the day, if cost is the best evidence, cost is good evidence. And especially, yeah, in those neighborhoods where you've got the handful of new properties that have been built, I don't want to look at a property built in, 2015 and then use a bunch of properties built in 1911 to say, here's the value.
Right, right. Or even if there's like a rem a home on the block that's been remodeled, but another property that hasn't had any remodeling or improvements done, but yet they're seeing their price in, their assessed value increase over time because of these activities that are happening around them.
Yes.
Um, and I know some of that is basic market value, but would it make sense for them to perhaps consider having an appeal or having someone come out?
Yeah, I mean, I say always call your appraiser and talk to him. Just see, go over your property, any issues or what you've done. But I mean, be honest too, because I've had people call and appeal, and then I've gone out and been like, you've redone the bathroom, we don't have that on our record. You've redone your kitchen, we don't have that on our record. So, you know, talk to them and be honest. And, if they're telling you, okay, well, your property looks like these other four properties I have, and they're all 150 bucks a square foot. We have you assessed at 130. You might want to say, okay, thank you. I'll talk to you later.
Right, right. I mean,
There.
there is that risk that it could go up as opposed to going down. I did have one thing that I wanted to make sure that you touch on, and then we'll probably wrap this part up and move on to Emmett. Um, there was a comment in the chat that talked about their bank and their insurance assessed them at a particular amount. Um, that's more appraised value, not assessed value. Can you talk about the difference between assessed value, appraised value, and market value?
Well, I mean, they can all be the same. They might not be. Um, again, when an assessor, we have to follow it's Article 8 of the Constitution, which is uniformity. So we've got to value all properties uniformly within a neighborhood. When
Mhm.
a fee appraiser is doing a single property appraisal for a bank, they might just look at three sales and determine a value. They have, and if they're looking at a particular ranch and three ranch sales, they really only care about their subject that they're valuing. They have no consideration for any of the other properties, and they might not be having, they don't really have to consider any of the other sales too. So we do, as city assessors, we kind of have to have everything in a, kind of in the stew cooking to determine what's fair for the neighborhood. But that's part of why we try to stratify it in, we're not just putting, triplexes and ranches and everything and trying to come up with a value that way. We're trying to keep single families, keep duplexes separate. We're trying to be aware of the different condition properties are in and things like that to say, okay, if you're an average condition, single family in this neighborhood, properties are generally selling between 130 and 150 a square foot. And that's where everything should be assessed.
Okay, great. Was there anything else that you saw that we should maybe try to make sure we address in the next 3 minutes?
Yeah, there were a lot of concerns for seniors, which I agree for. People priced out in Wisconsin can property taxes, can we have special property tax rates for seniors or special property tax based on income?
No, there's nothing. There are some programs available to try to help people stay in their homes, but that's not anything through the assessor's office that we do. Those are outside programs, other
Yeah.
entities that do that. Ours it's a pretty narrow, straightforward focus. What is the market value? What are properties selling for? That's what they have to be assessed at. And
And
then
the and the
everybody pays the
yeah,
same rate.
because of the Constitution of Wisconsin that says that we can't have that, that other states allow that, but Wisconsin we don't. So
Yeah, I
that
know
is
it's
the
as it
limitation of the uniformity clause with us. So just letting people know about that, that we wish we had a different tax system and maybe we can get that, but right now we don't. So I think that's the end for me. Thanks.
Great. Um, Thank you, Ryan. Really appreciate it.
you're
Um,
welcome.
so we're going to move on to Emmett from Housing Resources. So Emmett, I think you are up.
All right, great. Thank you, Heather, and thank you everybody for getting the opportunity to talk to everybody. I just want to talk a little bit about what we do. I represent Housing Resources. We are a HUD housing counseling agency, and our mission really is to support homeowners. We work with people who are looking to buy homes, and then on my side, I work with existing homeowners, and that includes anything that supports people staying in the home, foreclosure prevention counseling, questions about equity, repair programs. But this time of year, it is primarily dealing with assessments and appeals and things related to that. And I understand that there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of anger about changes in the assessments and what that means in terms of cost. And our role as a counseling agency is to help homeowners to really figure out what the best options are to address those issues. So we do, and we can and do help people with the appeal process. If you have questions about the appeal process, or you want to just talk over how that process works, we do a lot of work in that area. We can help to put the appeals together, help to figure out how to get that supporting documentation, because as was mentioned earlier, the key to a successful appeal is really that supporting documentation. There has to be something that you're pointing to in the appeal process that explains why you feel the assessed value is not representative of what your house is actually worth. That's really what it comes down to, and that's a large part of what we can help strategize, figure out where to get that information, how to structure the argument so that it makes the most sense and has the best chance at success. The other thing that we do, and we had when we've done this work in the past, a lot of people we will get in calls that people will say, the assessment is probably accurate in terms of what my house is worth. I just can't afford those payments. And there's a few things that we can try and help people do in a situation like that. One, as was mentioned, for senior citizens, there is a deferral program, is a tax deferral program in the state of Wisconsin for senior citizens. It's not the easiest thing in the world to qualify for. There's a lot of catches to it, but we can help people to review that and see if they might qualify for it. It's also in certain areas of the city, an anti-displacement program can help to freeze taxes. It doesn't reduce taxes, but it can freeze them. So you're kind of insulated from the increases going forward, and we can help with that process as well. The other thing that we do a lot of times is also just help people figure out what this new assessment is going to mean in terms of a higher tax bill. We can do those calculations and get a rough idea of what that new tax bill is going to mean, and what that's going to mean for monthly payments. If the mortgage is escrowed, what that's going to mean for your escrow payment. If you don't owe money on the property, what that's going to mean in terms of either the tax bill or a tax payment plan with the city, and then figure out how to plan and budget for those things. Um, anyone that knows me and the work that I've done knows that property taxes are something that I've been fighting for a long time, and it is. I understand your frustration because it's a constant source of frustration for me too. Because, like people had mentioned earlier, the uniformity clause with the state constitution really limits what municipalities can do. It limits what individuals can do, and so we're stuck in really a system that doesn't provide a whole lot of tools. And I know that's not what people join the call to hear and not what people want to know, but it is to a certain extent the reality of the circumstances is that there aren't a whole lot of great tools that we have, but we do work with homeowners to figure out the best options available for them and figure out how to plan for those options and move forward, and to make sure that the situation can be made as affordable as possible. And that's the work that we do with individuals. So we meet with individuals, and we'll talk about your particular circumstance and really develop a work plan and figure out how to go forward, whether it's the appeal process, whether it's budgeting going forward, whatever options might be there. We'll help to figure those options out and move forward on them. And the other thing that people have worked with me know is that I'm going to be direct and honest about the options. If there are limited options, I'm going to let you know right away, because the worst thing that we can do as a counseling agency is help people burning out their energy on a situation that we know is not going to go anywhere. So sometimes people don't want to hear that. I get people get mad at me, I get yelled at. That's fine, that's part of my job, I can deal with that. But what I can't deal with and what I can't tolerate is wasting other people's time and burning out homeowners energy on things that aren't going to be successful. So sometimes the answer is that I give people is not what they want to hear, but it's going to be the absolute honest truth to the best that I know it, and to help support homeowners, because that's really my goal, is to make sure that you understand the reality of the situation and what your options are, and what your options, just as importantly, what your options are not, and how to work within the system that we have. We don't have, to be honest, we don't have a great system. We don't have a lot of tools, but we have to work within the system that we have. In terms of larger advocacy, dealing with state laws, we have started to make some progress there and push on there, but that's going to be a process. So that is the situation that we are dealing with, and the support that we can provide to homeowners, and make sure that we can give you the information that you need and figure out the steps you need to take and help you enact those steps to get into the best situation that's possible given the circumstances. So I mean, that's kind of the quick pitch. I'm happy to answer questions or talk more about particular topics that have come up in the chat. I haven't been able to follow the chat as it's been going as I've been speaking.
There was one question about paperwork that needs to be provided for, I'm assuming that's for the appeal process.
Yeah, so like was mentioned earlier with Ryan, the appeal form itself is a pretty simple form. It can be done online. It can be filled out. It's like a 1 or 2 page form. And the deadline for that, like Ryan said, is the third Monday in May. So I believe that's the 18th this year. The city does give time. If you get the appeal form in by the 18th, you do have additional time to provide the supporting documentation. And that's going to depend on the circumstances. That could be a comp that shows that the market values don't match what the assessment says. It could be, photos of the condition of the property showing, damage or things that might limit the property. It could be documentation that the assessment is incorrect, like Ryan mentioned, in terms of number of bathrooms, square footage, whether you have, finished spaces in the basement or attic or things like that. So the documentation can vary. I mean, it will vary depending on your particular circumstances, but it's generally related to the physical condition or the build out of the home.
Or the comps, right?
Yes.
Right. Okay, good. I was just trying to see if there was, I was just looking. So this may not necessarily be a question for you, Amit. It was directed at you, but I think it might be better for Ryan, but either one of you. Why are they charging different districts differently? So, one district saw a decrease, whereas another one saw a very large increase. So aldermanic districts, any sense of rhyme or reason? I think you touched on this a little bit, Ryan, and you said that it's obviously market, but it's because of some of the growing activity in some of those districts. Is that what you were saying before? Okay.
Okay. Yes, that's true. Yeah, again, it falls back a lot on sales. And as is the case, if the sales are below the assessment, we do lower the assessment. So, um, but if the sales are above what our assessment was, those continue to go up. And, I think we did have a few areas. I think there was a couple of, condos on the far west side. We saw those sales declining in a few of the projects. But there were only a handful, I think, that saw a decrease in the sales numbers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Emmett, I think you feel it, and I feel it, everybody on the calls feel it, the pressure of these high increases in assessment. So as someone with a lot of experience, what is your will do first if they are, what are you recommending that people do first as the housing resources folks?
Yeah, well, like Ryan said, one of the first things is to contact the assessor's office and get that information, or contact us as well. I'll put all my contact information in the chat, and we can talk through that process. If you're uncomfortable with calling the assessor's office, we can make that call with you. Most of the information is public records information, so we can access it and help you to figure out what the options are. But I mean, the first and most important thing is to reach out either to the assessor's office or to us and get that process started, because especially with the appeal process, it's a very limited amount of time. The appeal process, the books opened yesterday, and like I said, they're only open until May 18th. So there's not a whole lot of time to do that if the appeal is what you're looking to do. So the most important thing is to start as quickly as possible, either contacting the assessor's office or our office. And I'll put my information in the chat now, so you can contact me directly and can help you to connect with a counselor that can talk with you about those things.
I did have one question. You had talked about how you can help people estimate what they might expect for their property tax bill. Can you talk a little bit about how you do that?
Yeah, so there is a taxing rate that the city uses. The city, I believe, and Ryan, you can provide some more detail on it, but the city is empowered to collect the taxes for both the city and the county and the other taxing entities. So it all goes through the city, and there's a rate that's used to figure out the taxes for all of those different things. And so we can, look at the assessment, the difference in the value, and using the taxing rate, figure out what that's going to make a change, how much that's going to be a change with the taxes. And also, it's good to review the last year's tax bill to compare them, because Ryan had mentioned this briefly. There are things that get added on the tax bill: special assessments, water bills. If they're unpaid, they'll be on the tax bill. So it's good to compare year to year to see what other things have been on the tax bill in the past, and figure out if those are going to be on the tax bill again this year. And that'll help get a more accurate idea of how that bill will change from one year to the next.
And if
And
your
we
taxes are escrow, that can help you make sure that you are adjusting your escrow accordingly as
yeah.
well, right?
And yes, and this is also the time of year that homeowners who do have a mortgage get escrow assessments from the mortgage company, and those often will detail the projected change in the escrow and mortgage payments. Escrow assessments are notoriously difficult to understand and read, and we get a lot of calls this time of year based on that too. So if you're getting statements from your mortgage company saying that your mortgage is going to change, and you don't, understand why, or you want to know what your options are in dealing with that, that's another. It's separate from the assessment, but another thing that we do a lot of work in. And just like with the assessments, when you're looking at escrow reevaluations from the mortgage company, you do, if you go through it, find mistakes from time to time. You find reasons to challenge those things. So that's something else that we do provide help with homeowners for dealing with. Yeah.
One final question, and then I'm going to pass it on to our colleague Karen. Does Housing Resources offer Spanish language assistance for the appeal process?
Yes. My one of my counselors is fluent in Spanish and English, and she does the work in both languages. Yes.
Great. That was Luis. I know, so Emmett, just so yeah.
Well, all right. Hey, Louis.
Put it in your okay.
Good to see you.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Emmett. Really appreciate it. The website, so you may want to put in the Housing Resources
Yeah,
website.
the website is hri-wi.org. I'll type it in the chat. It's actually the same as my email address. Just the end of the email address is the website.
Great.
So that's in the chat as well. So you can email me. You can give me a call, and we can. I can talk with you, or one of my other counselors will reach out with you, and we'll go through the circumstances, figure out what goes on. There's one question that popped up about water bill, and anytime I get the opportunity to talk about water bill, I will jump on that. So the way water bill affects your mortgage and escrow payment: if you have delinquent water bills by the end of October, that delinquent amount will roll onto your tax bill. Once it's on your tax bill, it's basically treated as a lump sum. When the mortgage company gets that tax bill, if the water bill's been added to it, it's going to be much higher than they budgeted for in the escrow. So just to use really simple numbers, that would be the third quarter water bill. So you'd have 3 water bills by that point. So if each water bill was $200, that'd be an additional $600 on top of the tax bill. That's probably going to be more than was budgeted for in the escrow. So the mortgage company is going to do a couple things. First, they're going to pay that bill. That's in the mortgage contract. They have the right to pay the tax bill, whatever the dollar amount says. And then they will first come back to you to get that extra money that they had to pay out of pocket for. And then secondly, they will raise the escrow amount, anticipating that next year's tax bill is going to be as high as this one. So using that $600 figure, they'll charge you $600 to pay back to them, and then basically charge you $600 paying forward for the future water bill. So in this scenario, you'd see an extra $1,200 in mortgage payments. So that'd be $100 a month increase in mortgage payment. Water bills are one of the number one reasons I see people in foreclosure. So water bill hits the taxes, it causes the escrow to go up, causes the mortgage payment to go up to a level that's unaffordable for homeowners. Sometimes we can get some of those costs rolled back out of the payment, but a lot of it's going to be kind of baked in there for at least the next year. So if you're struggling with the water bill, the most important thing to do is get on a repayment plan with the waterworks. If you're on an active repayment plan, the amount won't be considered delinquent and it won't roll onto the taxes. But once it rolls onto the taxes, it's a real killer. It really causes a lot of people a lot of trouble. So that's another thing that we spend a lot of time with. So yeah, if you're struggling with that, reach out to us too.
Thank you. Thank you for covering that. That's important. I'm gonna pass it on to Karen, who's gonna talk a little bit about comps. We've talked a bit about it already, but I thought it would be great to hear it directly from a realtor. So Karen, can you share a little bit of information about that for us?
Yes. Yes, I can. Okay, so when it comes to comps, as the deputy commissioner of the assessor's office said, that you want to consider properties that are similar to yours as far as architectural design, bedrooms, bathroom square footage, and property condition. So when looking for comps, you want to work with a real estate agent, or you can do it yourself if you want to go on Zillow or Redfin or whatever other real estate platform they have out there. Is to check for properties whose conditions are really similar to yours, because that's what will make your case. If the city has comps that have had a lot of improvements and you haven't, as he mentioned, you're going to have to prove that. So you're going to want to check for properties that are really similar to yours. So if your property has not been updated in a number of years, you want to find comps where it's the exact same thing. Those properties have not been updated. And I believe he said January 1. So it gives you like 4 months of sales to kind of look at to determine if there are any comps that are going to prove your case for you. Um, and those comps, again, like I said, you want those comps to be properties where they need repair. The sales price would not be high. It would be low because they're at below what the market is demanding for a really nice turnkey property. In our sales meeting with Homestead, we talk often about the amount of inventory that's available, which really drives up the value of a property. And right now, it's still considered a seller's market because there's only like 3 months of inventory available. And that just means that if no new homes are listed for sale, all current inventory would be sold in 3 months at the current rate of demand. So if no more new properties came out there, what's out there will be sold in 3 months, which means there's going to be a lot of demand for that. And if there's a lot of demand for a property, it's going to drive the price up. Even those properties that might be, suffering from maintenance, because investors are looking at buying something that they can fix up and then drive the cost up even more because they're going to put the improvements into it. But I would suggest, working with a real estate agent, having them, at your home so they can see what your house looks like, get a real good feel for the condition of it, and then search for comps that are real similar to yours. And then the two of you can talk about, what you agree upon, why you agree upon it, or why you don't agree upon it, so that you have solid evidence or paperwork to provide if you want to try to appeal or to determine whether or not you want to try to appeal.
Yeah, and what kind of a range, a geographic range, would be ideal to look at for those comps?
In your neighborhood. You want to stay within your neighborhood. I know with appraisers, they will look starting like within a mile of the subject property. You can do that, and it may work for you, but it might be best to stay within your neighborhood because some neighborhoods, um, the lower value properties might in one neighborhood might be here, but then like let me see my hand here, but in the same different neighborhood where the value is a little bit higher, property might be the same condition as this, but it might be a little bit up here because of uh, the neighborhood, I guess, appeal. If you want to say neighborhood appeal will drive the value up, but try to stay within your neighborhood. There should be enough data out there with um, to be able to determine whether or not you're property is within the assessed value, if those values are there, right?
So neighborhood doesn't necessarily mean like your next door neighbor. It means like your
Absolutely not.
of the city, like that distinct area of the city.
Right.
Washington Park or Clark Square, or that's what you mean, really, right? Is more
Exactly. Right. Not your block, but the neighborhood that you live in, and even potentially the adjoining neighborhoods, because there's only maybe a block separating those two. Maybe a river might be separating, but a lot of neighborhoods are only separated by a street.
a
Like
street.
one side of the street is one neighborhood, and the other side could be another neighborhood.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And the other thing that I've heard about are people who have a somewhat unique home, and that there aren't comps in their neighborhood.
Right.
What do they do then? What do you advise?
Those, yeah, and those properties are even challenging when you're trying to market because that means you might have to push out a little bit further to find something that's similar to that property. So it would be the same thing. Just push out a little bit more to see if you can find something similar to that particular property.
Mhm. Great. Super helpful. Thank you, Karen. I really appreciate that. Something that we are doing here at Take Root, and I know Beth is doing, and she's going to talk a little bit about it, is we have some realtors that are available like Karen, to assist folks with this process. So Beth, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of what we're thinking might be next steps that we would be offering to folks, and then wrap us up since we are 5 minutes to time?
Great. Well, first of all, just want to say thank you so much to you, Heather, Ryan, Emmett, Karen, all the great questions, all the participants and presenters for sharing so much tonight, and just the supporters and residents who are behind the things that we can do every day, like bring this presentation. So we're so grateful for that. I've been putting you can also reach out through a Google form and we will follow up and make a connection with you with a realtor. And in the case of Habitat homeowners and Habitat home repair partners, we will be able to talk with you one-on-one in a similar way to Emmett to talk about what are some options and support you during this time. So we know this is really hard. We know it's scary and difficult to think your property taxes might be above what you can pay, and we're here to support you, as is Take Root and the Assessor housing resources. We're all on people's side to be able to support. So I'm going to put that in the chat one more time. And Heather's also going to send out an email after this that has a lot of the information. We're going to try and capture the questions too, so that perhaps we can answer some of them in the questions and provide some clarity that way as well. But just thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for being here. And we're grateful for all of you.
Great. Thank you so much, Beth. And then you're going to put in the chat again, the form. If people have questions or are looking for some guidance or assistance, particularly if they're wanting to do one of these comps, and particularly those that Habitat homeowners or people who have utilized some of the home repair programs through Habitat, they've arranged to have some realtors. Take Root Milwaukee has some members who are realtors who have indicated an interest and a willingness to help those who are not Habitat homeowners to get connected with a realtor that can help with those comps. Yes, first class resident, I saw your hand up. We were just not taking questions from the audience that way. So thank you for posting your questions. I was just trying to read this on the fly here to see. So it said that, does the city have an investigation unit for open market, fake, inflated, fraudulent property buying? So that has more to do with purchase as opposed to current assessed value of property. Really geared more towards out-of-state investor, corporate landlord properties, purchasing the homes at an inflated price, I believe is what. I know that this is something that is definitely on the minds of the city, as well as a number of advocacy and organizing groups, including Common Ground, and they are working with the city attorney's office actually to they filed a lawsuit to go after one particular out-of-state investor property owner. So stay tuned, more to come on that. So yeah, so thank you again, everyone. Really appreciate you sticking with us, and hopefully the information that we provided this evening to everyone was beneficial. And thank you so much for taking your time this evening to be with us.